If you've been struggling to keep up with the state of negotiations and ceasefires around the Iran war and the Strait of Hormuz, you're not alone. We've all been hearing a lot of it.
What we're not hearing a lot of is what Iranians are thinking and hoping for. Since the war in Iran began more than 2 months ago, Iranians have been under a near total internet blackout. Few Western journalists have been permitted to operate in the country.
But in recent weeks, the BBC's chief international correspondent, Lyse Doucet, has been on the ground reporting in Tehran. And today on the show, we talk to her. She joins us in the studios after landing back in London.
From the BBC, I'm Tristan Redman in London.
And I'm Asma Khalid in Washington, D.C. And welcome to The Global Story on YouTube.
So great to have you with us after, so few Western journalists have been in Iran. You were there for around 10 days. What's it like? Are there actually visible signs of the war that you're seeing all over the place?
Now, I'm going to do a little correction because you are a global story. Because it's not just Western journalists going in. There's an Indian crew in there now before us. And there was a Japanese crew. We were in, there was, I think, a Brazilian crew. I got called by some Thai journalists. So I think it's international media. But there aren't many going in because the ceasefire is shaky, and I think the authorities are deciding they don't want too many journalists around. There are times when we were on the ground where you'd see the shops were open, young Iranians were in the cafes and restaurants, people were celebrating birthdays. You could be forgiven for thinking, was there really a war? But then when you hear more about daily life, when you drive past, when you visit scenes where missiles slammed into residential areas, when missiles destroyed sites of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, we saw that on the 12-hour drive in. And Iranians are now still dealing with the impact of this war.
But it sounds like overall there's a feeling of life goes on.
I've always said that when in situations of war, in situations of life and death, people focus on life even more, that they embrace it. They embrace the small joys and just the day to day. And that was my overriding perspective, is that Iranians now are just living from one day to the next, knowing they are at the mercy of world powers, most of all President Trump, President and Commander-in-Chief of the United States, what Israel decides to do, what the region decides to do. And they are at the mercy of their leaders who have emerged from this war. And whatever President Trump says about regime change, it is the same people, different faces, but a more hardline, more militarized leadership in Iran.
So, Lyse, as you mentioned, you had this 12-hour journey in by land. You came in via a land border from Turkey. You then arrived in the capital city of Tehran. And regular listeners will know that this is a city that you have visited a number of times over the years. I want to know what surprised you the most about the ways in which people in Tehran are living now.
It was a very different mood from when we were there in February. Tehran is a beautiful city, no matter who's in charge. It's still a city of gorgeous parks, of stylish cafes. And I think cafes are cafes anywhere. I was thinking of this, even in London where students have no money. They're hanging out in cafes all day. They buy one cup of coffee. And it's the same in Iran. We were there. We were getting lunch one time. We were told, this is a very popular cafe, and it was famous for it had great hummus, it had wonderful grilled sandwiches, great lattes, and it was a warm spring day. So the front of the cafe, the windows had been open. I stopped to chat to 3 young people. One of the woman had very short cropped hair, green turquoise glasses, really fashionable, wearing a bow tie, and she was there with her brother and their friend, and they were smoking Napoli cigarettes and chain smoking and moaning they had no money and I just chatted with them, and it could be anywhere, but of course it's Iran. And as soon as we spoke to people, we heard about prices were going higher.
So much money for something like a bread like this was 35 2 months, about 3 months ago. Now it's 3 times more. People go through hell right now to be able to pay for a loaf of bread.
And remember, we talk about single-digit inflation in most Western countries. When we were there in February, it was a staggering 60%. Now economists are saying it's 70%.
Even higher.
People talked about, young people spoke to us about job losses, even by the government's conservative estimate. They say 1 million jobs were lost by the impact of the war and also the internet blackout. It's so dire that even the government's communications minister called for the digital blackout to be lifted. It is being eased selectively and slowly. But the minister said that 10 million jobs were affected by Iranians needing to be connected. He talked about it as a right. And of course, there is this terrible, this really troubling contradiction that the officialdom, they use X and all the other social media platforms. They're constantly trolling President Trump. They have it. They have access to the internet, but the people don't. And as journalists, like other journalists working, both Iranian and foreign journalists in Iran, we also had access to the internet. But the broad majority of Iranians can only access the domestic internet.
Lyse, you mentioned the economy. I know you were out on the streets. You were interviewing people. How much did you hear about that from people?
So we went to one popular street in the center of the city to try to get a sense of what life was like now.
It's a shopping street?
It's a street like any street with ATMs at the banks, shoe shop, fast food outlets, cafes, of course, another shop selling household goods, groceries. One of the encounters which really stuck in my mind, because as I mentioned, I was very much taken by the way Iranians were living from one day to the next, because so much of their future is no longer in their own hands. There was a story on the BBC World Service recently talking about the lipstick effect, which is that we take joy in small things. When big things are going wrong, we take joy in small little things. Like you put a bit of bright red lipstick on and you feel a little bit better. And so when this architect strode by, and I stopped him and I said, "Do you work here in Tehran?"
Well, yes, I'm an architect and also I teach.
And he started talking to us and he told us a bit about how he gets through the day.
So we are just living everyday life, making like things to enjoy, like they call it lipstick effect, that every day we go forward. So to make us happy for anything.
But you could have a life outside of Iran if you wanted, but you stay. Why?
Well, I just moved back 1 year ago. I lived in Berlin for 16 years. And I just moved back because I love Iran and I thought, if I'm not here now, when should I be here?
Another place, if I can mention, which really struck with me, the government had called on its supporters to take to the streets every night. Of course, it wants to send a signal that it has support. But some of the major squares in the city do fill up every night. And some of them are government loyalists. Others may go because they feel compelled, but there are definitely government loyalists are there. And I was really surprised. We went to one square and it was like a town hall. And they were having heated discussions about whether they should negotiate or not. And one woman stood up and she was
negotiate
angry.
with the Americans and the Israelis.
So one woman stood up and she shouted at the moderator. In fact, she ended up going to the stage and grabbing the microphone because she said the former supreme leader, who of course was Assad, he only went to negotiations because he had to. And you had this crowd of government supporters.
It's better if negotiations don't happen. The war should continue until America and Israel are defeated.
But the people of Iran are suffering economically from this war.
There are no problems with the economy. We just want Israel destroyed, and we want America to leave the Middle East.
The women all dressed with black veils or conservative scarves, arguing about whether or not it was good to negotiate.
I'm here for my country, for say something to our enemies. Our enemies should know that we are here for our country and they should open their eyes to see here.
Suddenly there was a roar as this whole parade of motorcycles went by with mullahs, like white and black turbans, had put on uniforms and they had rifles strapped across their chests. So you had mullahs on motorcycles parading past and, you couldn't make it up. But this was the government starting to send a defiant message to the enemy. If you want war, bring it on. But we want to negotiate. We want to find a way out. But so you have these really conflicting, very, very different scenes.
I wonder if you could tell us the story about the woman that you met, Fatima.
So here's a family going into the shopping mall, and your name is?
Fatima.
Fatima. What are you going to buy tonight?
Nothing. We don't have any purpose about the exact thing. Only we want to pass the time today.
You had that discussion about the fact that she wasn't wearing a headscarf, which I thought was fascinating.
Can I ask you, you're not wearing a headscarf?
Headscarf? No, sometimes I wear.
You have one around your neck.
We are Muslim, but sometimes I wear and sometimes we don't wear.
But nobody bothers you anymore. It's
I
still
mean,
the law.
it's counterintuitive, isn't it? The question of the headscarf right now in Iran, whether people are wearing the headscarf or not wearing the headscarf. What did you find in Tehran when you were there?
I've often said, Tristan, that every time there is an uprising, another round of protests, they leave their mark. And it was the protests of 2022, 2023, whose rallying cry was women, life, freedom. Zan Azadi Zindagi, was predominantly led by women, calling for greater freedoms for women because it was triggered by a woman, Mahsa Amini, a Iranian Kurdish woman, taken in by the morality police because her clothes were not modest enough, and she died in custody. And that sparked this protest. And during that protest, many women, those who want to, took off the headscarves and they didn't put them back on. And you really feel that quiet courage of women not wanting to go back. Now it's almost, I hesitate to use the word normal, but you see women of all ages not wearing the headscarf, not wearing what they call the manteau, which is the long coat. There are women who still wear the head-to-toe black veils. There are women who still wear the headscarf, but the point is that it's their choice. There is a feeling that this is permanent, but of course you never know in Iran. And I spoke to one Iranian scholar about it, and I said, well, how do you make sense of this? Because we had always said that one of the last things to go in the Islamic Republic would be the dress code for women, because it was a symbol of the Islamic Revolution, women's honor and piety. And he said, well, the people in charge realize that even if the women don't cover their hair, the regime's not going to come tumbling down. So women are daring to hope, although some of them I see still wear the scarf around their necks just in case. And of course, there are areas which are more. Let us say if you go to the holy city of Mashhad and you go to shrines, of course, you're going to wear the headscarf. But a lot of women were choosing not to wear them. And while we're discussing this, Tristan, I should address, people sent me questions on social media saying, why is Lyse Doucet wearing the headscarf when Iranian women are not? When we were out filming, recording, meeting people, sometimes myself and my producer, Charlotte Scarr, didn't wear headscarves, but because it is still the law that, women went, if the authorities so decide, they can say, right, it's the law, you have to wear a headscarf. If not, we're going to detain you. So as a foreigner in Iran, it's a better choice for me to respect the law. So on air, I wore the headscarf.
So one of the people that you spoke to that really stuck out to me was a gentleman that you met in a square who was smoking a cigarette.
Here's a young man hanging out, having a cigarette. Do you often come to this square?
Oh, yes.
It's a very nice, relaxed atmosphere. There's
Yes.
music.
Yes, it's nice music, but these days, that's a terrible days for us in my country.
He spoke to you about what he hoped for from the war.
What do you think the people of Iran want?
To regime change. War can help to change the regime. Okay?
And he said very openly that he wanted regime change.
Yeah, war is better.
You don't worry that Iran will suffer a lot if the war continues?
No.
So war is better.
War is better for us
than this situation.
Yes.
And I was very struck by that because I was surprised that someone was okay to say that publicly out loud to a foreign journalist. Were you surprised by that?
We heard that as well in February. People would actually seek us out after the protests had been put down and said, we want you to hear our voice. We want to tell you. But this time as well, there were still people, and you always when people say to you, we want the war to continue. It's not something you expect to hear given the impact of the war. We heard this one man openly said, we didn't have a camera at the time, but we were recording for radio. He wasn't the only person who said, I want more war because I still believe that, yes, the war is not great, but it's better than this situation. We want regime change. And you do hear that from people. But in another square, not so far away, a short drive away, another man said to us, I want more war, but I want it because I want to defeat Israel and the United States. I want the U.S. to leave its military bases in the region. So I think we have to keep reminding ourselves that Iran is a country of 92 plus million people. There's going to be a churn of emotions. Different parts of Iran were affected differently by the war. Tehran bore the brunt of it as the capital. There were many more targets for Israel and the United States there, but there were parts of Iran which were hardly affected. There are parts in the rural areas and some parts of the city which are still supporting the government. There are others which there's widespread discontent, and that may deepen given that the economic stresses and strains. I don't know how they're going to square the circle, but there is going to be more pressures on people.
Lyse, you describe two views of people who want the war to continue for very, very different reasons. I know you also heard from some of those who are tired of this and want the war to end and who are really nervous, it seems like, about how shaky this ceasefire looks.
So many people did tell us about what it was like during the war. One young man said to me it was terrifying. That is, they were, because of the internet blackout, that they couldn't contact their families, and their families were in different cities. He said, we felt very alone. We visited streets where there were gaping holes because a whole building had been knocked down, left just as piles of rubble and twisted metal, chunks of concrete, and that across the street, many more houses had either been completely destroyed or the facades torn off. And on all of those visits, I mean, of course, on a short visit, you can't establish whether or not there was a military targets, but neighbors would come up to us and say, we've lived on this street for 25 years, or we knew who was living there. This is a residential area. And they were very, very angry. In fact, on one of the streets, there was graffiti on the wall, which said, on the wall next to that totally collapsed building, and it said, Trump's help has arrived. Death to America. And you'll remember that at the beginning of the protests, President Trump kept saying, I'm going to help the protesters. Help is on the way. And one man said to us rather sarcastically, whose whole building was destroyed. It wasn't even the target. It was across the street. What happened here? Why do you think this happened?
This 1 month ago, this Trump destroyed for the help for Iranian people. This is now this gift, yeah? A special gift.
And he said, well, what a gift the president has given for us. And again, we don't know. We just arrive at these places. People tell us their views, and visits like that where you're going to see the destruction, going to see the impact of the war, speaking to people in the neighborhood to find out why they thought that building was attacked. But then you also see, the sort of glimpses of Iranian society. There was one visit on one street, one of those leafy residential areas in the center of the city, where there was one man who didn't want us there, who tried to prevent us from filming, even though we had the permissions. But at the same time, someone else on the street brought us out trays of tea and biscuits, welcome to our street. And so you saw these different sides of Iranian society. And of course, we have to be cognizant. It's a very sensitive time where emotions are still raw, and people just don't know what's going to happen next.
Well, Lyse, when we talk about a ceasefire and negotiations. The ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran is looking increasingly fragile. I mean, here we are taping this on Tuesday morning. This is Tuesday, May 5th, and official talks have not resumed. What did Iranian government officials tell you? What is their desired outcome here?
So we were there over that weekend where President Trump announced that J.D. Vance, the U.S. Vice President, would be heading back to Pakistan. But in Tehran, there was no indication that Iran's delegation was going. We happened to be in the foreign ministry that afternoon, waiting to interview the foreign ministry spokesperson, Ismail Baghai. And they were locked in meetings. The foreign minister was in meetings for hours, discussing with the Pakistani mediators, sending messages to the Americans. And it was very clear, as far as we could see, that Iran had not taken the decision yet to go to for a second round of high-level face-to-face talks. So when we finally, by the end of the day, did sit down with Ismail Baghai, he basically set out why they still had not made a decision to go back to Islamabad for a second round of high-level face-to-face talks with the U.S.
Literally speaking, there have been many violations of ceasefire. You know that during the course of the past 2 days, they have attacked Iranian vessels. They have taken hostage our people on board vessel Tuska. So this is not the behavior of a country that is really serious about a diplomatic process.
What do Iranians that you spoke to make of President Donald Trump? Just before you went to Iran, Donald Trump, a lot of us remember, on the 7th of April, he said, he made this threat that, quote, a whole civilization will die tonight. And then on Monday of this week, he said something along the same lines. He told Fox News that he would, quote, blow Iran off the face of the earth. What did the people you spoke to in Iran make of this kind of rhetoric?
What would anyone make of this rhetoric? Legal scholars, human rights experts, more than 100 of them signed a letter raising concerns about this kind of language, which was calling for a civilization to be destroyed. The harshest critics said it was genocidal language. Human rights experts said it was a violation of international humanitarian law. President Trump likes to say this is part of his negotiating tactics. His supporters will say, well, he raises these maximalist pressure and then he gets other people to capitulate. But it's not working with Iran. Iranians were shocked. Even those who don't support the government in Tehran were saying, what do you mean? Our civilization is so deep. You are about to mark your 250 years of the United States. We've been around for thousands of years. And I was reminded of this when we were making this 12-hour drive from the Turkish border to Tehran. And we stopped just, a roadside restaurant, a centuries-old caravanserai with these beautiful tiles and calligraphy and this traditional Iranian cuisine. Just the beauty of the tiles, of the architecture, and just a roads, a place to eat while you're driving, making a long drive. And so there were many who were very shocked by it. I think we've never seen this kind of, it's always I always say that in every war conflicts, they always unfold on two levels. There's what happens on the ground, and then there's the narrative, the control of the narrative, the perceptions of what's happening. And often that can have a huge impact on the way the war evolves. And sometimes the way people think the war is going is more important than the way the war is actually going. But we've never seen a president like this, a leader, using this kind of language. Whatever happens in Iran doesn't stay in Iran. And I think it is quite staggering that in this, we are now dealing with a war, a conflict, only being held at bay by this fragile ceasefire. But its impact is so profound worldwide, and It's something that the whole world has a stake in what happens both in the Strait of Hormuz, but also in the negotiations between Iran and the United States.
That's it for The Global Story on YouTube. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed our episode today, then I should mention that our show, The Global Story, is also an audio podcast. So you can find us every weekday on bbc.com or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.